Good morning, everyone. So far, we have nearly 250 people streaming in for this heritage debate. So I'm just going to talk for a moment or two to allow people to come in and get settled. Could I encourage everybody to make use of the chat function, please, to introduce yourselves and perhaps to have a bit of a conversation and raise any introductions that you might like to make to one another to see where you're all from. We've got an audience that's right across the heritage sector this morning for our heritage debate. Representatives from all four of the nations and some international guests as well. So we're really looking forward to hearing your perspectives, and we really want you to be involved throughout the session. I'm just going to introduce myself as we kick off. So I'm Carole Souter, I'm the chair of the Heritage Alliance. I'm an older white woman with grey hair and glasses. I'm wearing a headset at the moment, and I'm wearing a pale blue shirt. If you'd like to see live captions of the discussion today, you can enable closed captioning at the bottom of your screen or scan the QR code, which has more accessibility options for font size and color of text. I'm going to tell you a little bit about ourselves, the Heritage Alliance, before we kick off into the debate itself and introduce all of our wonderful panel members. So the Heritage Alliance is the membership body for the independent heritage sector in England. We champion the whole of the heritage sector: the built environment, archaeology, industrial and mobile heritage, intangible heritage, and also the supporting elements for that sector: the skills, the traditions, academic support, specialist collections, and the science that underlies much of what we do. We provide a trusted and supportive platform for heritage bodies to connect with one another, to raise issues, to raise questions, to gain skills and insights. We act as an advocate for the sector to Parliament, government and arm's length bodies, such as Historic England. And our heritage debate is one of two key moments that we have during the year, two large annual events. We have our Heritage Day in March, which provides a chance for us to celebrate all that we do, to learn from one another and to be together in person. And the debate itself tackles an issue that's of interest, we hope, to the whole sector at any given time. Our event will be recorded and it will be available from December. So what are we going to be talking about today? Well, our topic today is local decision-making, the future of heritage. We've invited our panel of experts from across the sector to consider the implications of the devolution agenda, what it might mean for us, and how heritage can take advantage of that agenda, one of the most significant government shifts in a generation, probably. There are many unknowns posed by the question, and inevitably that means that there could be some risks. So at this stage, we need to think about how we might manage unexpected changes as well as those we already know about. But today is very much about exploring what we would like to get out of devolution and local government reorganisation as much as what we predict. So we're going to hear from people who can answer that from the point of view of experience and their engagement, who are already working in devolved authorities, who are proactively managing community engagement, and who know best what the ideal mix of national and local engagement might look like. We'll hear about a particular government initiative, but I would ask you to remember that civil servants aren't ministers, and please don't expect any major announcements today or ask for things that only ministers can deal with. We'll be taking all of your questions and we can follow up with ministers as necessary. Some housekeeping for you as well before we go much farther. At the bottom of your screen, you should see the Q&A function. And please do raise questions as we go right through this debate. You have the opportunity to raise a question up the list of priority by clicking on the little thumbs up. So if there's a question that someone else has asked that you think is really important and you would really like us to make sure we answer, please do that. And at the end of the event, you'll be able to cast your vote in answer to the question, is local decision making the future of heritage? Excuse me. And lastly, please do share your thoughts and highlights from this event on social media. The hashtag is #HeritageDebate 2025. And before we go any further, it would be remiss of me not to thank our sponsors for this event, the Ecclesiastical Insurance Group, which have sponsored the event over a number of years and are very loyal supporters of the Heritage Alliance. And we're particularly pleased to have DC Thompson History and Bidwell sponsoring us this year as well. So we're very grateful to them. So we're now going to have a look at some of the things that you might want to see achieved through devolution. We're going to ask you to share your reflections, and some of you have already started doing this. This is great. Using the menti.com approach. So if you visit menti.com and enter the code on your screen, or click on the link in the chat bar. Thank you, Katie. We're going to ask you just in a few words to share what you hope devolution will achieve. And then secondly, any risks that you anticipate. Those of you who joined earlier have been doing this already, so I can see all sorts of things coming up on the screen, which is fantastic. But do contribute now before we look at the live results. It's a completely anonymous activity, so just say what you think, and it's not going to come back to you anywhere. But we really want to get a feeling of what the interest is and what people would like to see. Okay, just on my screen at the moment, I'm seeing better safeguarding, local dynamism, people wanting to understand the implications. And that's something that I think we're going to have to be following for some time, as we're not yet clear about the details of all of the devolution proposals. More local choice, more organic, grounded heritage agendas. I like that one as a sort of set of words that are really important to us. Stronger commitment to sense of place. Fantastic. So we've got all sorts of ideas already coming up, and we'll be coming back to Menti for more questions during the session. We've just put another link through to Menti, so do look in the chat if you're having trouble getting in, keep trying. Risks, of course, coming up, heritage falling through the cracks, possibly getting bound up in admin, less engagement at a national level, all sorts of things coming through there that I'm sure will ring a bell with a lot of people. Less funding. Fewer sources of funding. Okay, so funding clearly is going to be one of the things that people will want to hear about. Inconsistency or consistency also, I think, is something that that is going to be challenging for people to think about. So keep putting up your thoughts. Okay, I can see lots of things coming in. So I think it's probably time for us to meet our panelists. So can we do some speaker introductions? Today, we are joined by Owen Lloyd-James, who's Head of Communities and Local Government of Historic England, Anna Evis, CEO of the Oxford Preservation Trust, Quinton Carroll, Vice Chair of Algeo, Association of Local Government Archaeological Officers, Sara Wajid, Co-Chief Executive Officer of Birmingham Museums Trust, and Jamie Cowling, Deputy Director for Pride in Place in Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. I'm going to ask each panelist very briefly to introduce themselves to our audience using an audio description to paint a thumbnail so you can imagine them sitting there. And I'm going to start with Owen. So Owen, would you like to kick off for me, please?
Yes, certainly. Hello all, I am a white man in my mid-40s. I'm clean shaven with short cropped hair, and I'm wearing a dark blue shirt, and I'm sitting in front of a rather splendid picture of West Kennet Longbarrow, but unfortunately I've sat straight in front of the good bit, and apologies for that. I am the head of local government and communities in Historic England's Policy Development Department, and where I work with colleagues in government and beyond to ensure that policies and guidance properly reflect the wider contribution that heritage can make to people and places.
Thank you. Can we move through the slide? Anna, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Thanks, Carole. Hello, everybody. Nice to be here. I am Anna Evis, Chief Exec of Oxford Preservation Trust. I'm a middle-aged white woman with white hair, glasses, and a bright green top. I recently moved, 2 years ago, to Oxford Preservation Trust, and the Preservation Trust is one of the oldest of its kind in the country, nearly 100 years old. And it was set up to preserve and enhance the amenities of Oxford for the benefit of Oxford's people. It also has an object to promote public interest in the history of Oxford. So we're very much straddling that important connection between Oxford's heritage and the public benefit that it can bring, which is something that's always interested me. I'm actually a relative newcomer to working in a local context, because for many years I worked for English Heritage. So it's interesting for me to be moving from the national to the local. But because I'm now a trustee of the National Lottery Heritage Fund, I do have a kind of foot in the national camp too. So it'll be interesting to hopefully bring both of those perspectives to bear on today's debate.
Thank you very much, Anna. Sara.
Hello, I'm Sara Wajid. My pronouns are she and her. I'm a middle-aged Asian woman with short hair, wearing a black top and sitting in a white office room with a window in my background. I'm the Chief Executive Officer, Co-Chief Executive Officer of Birmingham Museums Trust alongside Zach Mensa, and we look after and manage 9 heritage sites in Birmingham, a city of 1 million people with one of the youngest and most ethnically diverse populations of any city in Europe. And we fall within Birmingham City Council, which is the largest city council in Europe. Looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Sara. I'm not sure I'd realised that Birmingham was the largest city council in Europe. That's fantastic. Jamie, I'm going along my screen at the top. So Jamie, would you like to introduce yourself next, please?
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Carole. Hi, I'm a civil servant in the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. I am responsible for the Pride in Place programme that will see £5 billion invested in 244 of the most deprived communities across the UK over the next 10 years. I've already seen quite a few of our locations fall within places people are joining on, so hopefully people have heard about it. If not, a great opportunity to talk about it. I'm also responsible for the Community Ownership Fund, which I hope people have bid into and successfully helped received. I've worked across Whitehall in a number of roles in the past, including Number 10, the Treasury and DCMS, and I'm a middle-aged white male wearing a blue jumper in my spare room.
Thank you, Jamie. And Quinton.
Thank you, Carole. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Quinton Carroll. I'm a mid-50s white male with grey hair. I'm wearing glasses and wearing a blue and white stripy shirt, no tie. And I'm sat in the Home Office, which has an embarrassingly untidy set of bookshelves behind me. I'm the Vice Chair of the Association of Local Government Archaeological Officers for England, which is a subset of the Heritage Alliance member. And we represent local authority services across the whole of the UK, but obviously we're focusing on England here. I am an archaeologist. I work for Cambridgeshire County Council, who are not an Alliance member. I must haste to say, I've been there nearly 30 years. Prior to that, apart from studying, I was actually a bank manager with HSBC. So I have a very different aspect to local interest, shall we say. In addition to my county role, where I run the Combined Environment Service now, I'm also an archaeological advisor for the Church of England, one of the dioceses, and I sit on various advisory boards like the Future Archaeological Archives panel and the advisory panel on the archaeology of burials in England. And my interest is very much getting the local voice out.
Great. Thank you very much, Quinton. I hope you'll agree we're extremely fortunate to have such a wide-ranging and experienced panel with us this afternoon. And when I say us, we are well over 450 online at the moment. So well done, everybody, for getting in. I can see from the chat that one or two people, more than one or two people, several people are having problems with Menti. Don't worry about it. Put anything you want to say in the chat, and we'll be keeping an eye on that. And we'll be picking up ideas about Menti for the future as well. But a lot of people are putting in their ideas, so please do keep going. There'll be a way of getting to us. Don't feel frustrated. Just use the chat if you need to. Okay, thank you. So before we get into the panel discussion, I'm just going to give a little overview of some of the highlights that have come up from placemaking case studies that we've been using. We've been developing this as part of the digital program for the event, and we've been collecting placemaking postcards from all over the place, which give a snapshot of some of the heritage projects currently underway up and down the country, giving an insight into what local decision making and community engagement can achieve. So I'm just going to give you a few examples of the postcards that have come in, and we're going to start with Dig the Castle. Now, this is a community archaeology project from Great Torrington in Devon, where the project actively engaged over 10% of the community in uncovering the story of a lost Norman Motte and Bailey castle at the heart of the town. The project has been nationally recognised for a well-being partnership with local charities. It's reinvigorated the public space, and there's been active community co-creation within a historically deprived area. It's had a lasting effect on the fortunes of the town, new media and political interest, helping to increase footfall and secure investment and inspire other heritage regeneration projects in Great Torrington. But then something completely different on a completely different scale. Let's look at Rochdale Town Hall. So this has recently been restored and reopened following 4 years of conservation work that's turned a tired building into a community asset serving one of England's most deprived areas. The project included the transformation of the surrounding public realm, turning a former car park into a multi-function green space at the heart of Rochdale, which now houses regular community events. So with that double benefit of bringing back some greenery into the area, as well as reusing the building. The project created over 1,000 volunteering, training and job opportunities, established a heritage skills studio, and has already welcomed around 30,000 visitors this year. And then on to Norfolk, where Norwich Historic Churches Trust has safeguarded 18 medieval churches through creative reuse since 1973, more than anywhere else in Northern Europe. The trust operates through a head lease arrangement with Norwich City Council and then leases the buildings to diverse tenants, including arts organisations, an auction house and a skateboard park. I'm going to need to find out more about that one. The innovative model has turned vulnerable historic buildings into affordable community and cultural spaces that support the city's regeneration while preserving its medieval character. Then up in Lancaster, Hague Hall, the Historic England Building Skills Programme is undertaking a pilot scheme which to work on a Grade 2 star listed 19th century building, which is currently on the Heritage at Risk register. Nearly a third of the contractors are reporting skills gaps in traditional building crafts. And so this is a programme of upskilling new people in endangered heritage crafts, including heritage stained glass making, which was added to the red list of endangered crafts in 2023. 3 trainees, a stained glass specialist, A plastering apprentice and a joiner work together on the conservation of the building, which will be reopened as a mixed use for the local community when the restoration is complete. And lastly, in West London, the Creative Campus at Chiswick House has repurposed unused buildings on this historic estate into a hub with 19 affordable artist studios, a new learning centre, and a restored 17th century walled garden. It addresses specific community needs in Hounslow, where over 50% of residents live in low-quality environments and 44% of adults are not physically active. The development includes the new kitchen garden hub for food bank partnerships, a health and wellbeing garden, and new educational programmes to reach more than 5,000 local children per year. We're really grateful to everyone who's provided a case study this year. There are many more on our case study hub, and you can view them all on our Heritage Debate webpage. So let's get back to our panel and our debate. We're looking at whether local decision making is the future of heritage. Don't forget, we can use the Q&A function or the chat function throughout to raise issues that you would like to know more about or you'd like to put to our panel. And we're now going to stop sharing the slides and go to the panel itself for discussion. And in typical fashion, and the need to start with an opening question to get everyone going, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to just talk about the biggest opportunity and the biggest challenge that they see for heritage in your own role as local decision making evolves. What's keeping you up at night? What's giving you hope? In either order. Maybe you want to be hopeful first. And I'm going to, just fair warning, folk, I'm going to go round as I see you on my screen. So forgive me if that leads to you being asked sooner than you expected or less soon than you expected. But I'm going to start to my right as I look at my screen. So Anna, I'm just talking a moment to give you the thought that that means you first. What's exciting and what keeps you awake about the possibility of devolution?
Well, I have to say that I'm going to take a bit of a step back with this question, because I think that the biggest challenge remains the same. And the biggest challenge and opportunity is this. It is how we develop a shared understanding of the value of the heritage in the place that we live or work, and how we develop a shared understanding of how that heritage can best serve the people who live there. And so, and when I'm talking about shared, I mean, you know, by communities, landowners, businesses, agencies, everybody. And, you know, that is a challenge that I'm sure lots of people on the meeting recognise. It is a challenge made harder when you have, you know, a resource-stretched local authority with, you know, especially when you have a kind of strong growth agenda, which might not necessarily take account at the moment of heritage opportunities. And so I suppose that in that context, the evolving local government arrangements may mean that that is harder in the short term as local officials and politicians are distracted by the, you know, what's happening. It may be that as one moves towards, in our case, probably a larger authority of one kind or another, you have to renegotiate all of those relationships all over again. But I feel my feeling, you know, having just been doing this for 2 years, is that the challenge remains the same, which is the hard graft of building relationships with the right people, of actually walking people around, looking at things together, you know, talking about drawing on case studies and proof of concept and all that stuff. And I don't think that changes. I just think it becomes a different set of people potentially that you have to engage. But fundamentally, if those relationships are not in place, everything is harder.
Thank you, Anna. And that's interesting because the first question we got in the Q&A from Adrian is about the risk of losing the relationships as there are changes. So if you've already got a great relationship going with your local officers and officials, there's some concern about having to remake those relationships and re-explain that.
Yeah, and just one thing to add, and then I'll be quiet because I know I've got to move on. But the other thing is that the other challenge, and this may well get harder, is to engage people actually on the ground in the city centre, for example, so that you're not talking to people on a Teams link and finding out they actually live in Holborn. So and that may well get harder. But I can't, I mean, it sounds of a very basic thing to say, but in fact, until you get people walking around looking at stuff with you, it's very hard to make progress.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm sure that's something that will echo with a lot of people on the call today. Jamie, how do things look from your point of view?
That's really interesting. And you mentioned echo. Anna's point definitely kind of echoes with me, but perhaps from a slightly potentially a different end of the telescope, but maybe we can get into that. Look, the opportunity I think is great. So the program I'm responsible for is a hyper local program. We are putting funding and powers in the hands of local people who live in the 244 most deprived neighbourhoods across the UK, as I mentioned at the start. That's really exciting, and that will give those communities the opportunity to invest and control the things which they find most important to them. And I think what's most exciting for this context is we have asked people, what makes you proud of where you live? And heritage is among the top responses. And so I was really excited to see some of the things in the Mentimeter earlier. Heritage is, for people, is very much about what makes them proud about where they come from. And we can have a discussion about what that means precisely. The thing that keeps me up at night is how we make the links and help those people who've got the decision-making powers and the investment with a number of the people who are on this call who are passionate, and can help them really shape that and deliver what they know sort of makes them proud in their area. So that's why I was really excited to be invited along today.
Great, thank you, Jamie. Entirely consistent with what Anna's identifying as the need for really local engagement. Sara, you've been doing a lot of that.
Hi, yeah, thanks. So, I mean, the first thing to say is this country is one of the most regionally unequal in Europe. It is much more centralised here than it was in this country in the 1970s, and much more centralised than our nearest economic neighbours in Europe. So devolution is a great opportunity, full stop. It's a chance to make a ruckus, it's a chance for a shake-up, and that in itself is really welcome. So, the opportunity, as I see it, is one to kind of, not just in heritage, but across many spheres of public life, is the opportunity to update the script on what Britishness is, on what form of Britishness we want to invest in and amplify. So a more inclusive, representative, hopeful one that is more genuinely democratic and rooted in our communities and in our sense of place. Devolution in itself can't deliver all of those things, but it is an opportunity, as we've seen in Birmingham with a citizens' jury, to really listen, really have that conversation about what is Birmingham, what does it want to be, how do we want to be as citizens with each other, how do we want to use our heritage assets, in our case, museums and historic premises, to galvanise and actually bring ourselves together at a time of dangerous social polarisation, and use our assets and our conversations around what matters to us and our energies as communities, as citizens collectively on the flip. And that has been the thing that's given me the most hope, the sort of ambition for social trust and hope and belonging. I saw it in that room, in those conversations between those jurors. And I also saw a phenomenal ability to cross social divides, economic divides, religious divides, all kinds, to think seriously about the future that we want and kind of put our differences aside. It sounds a bit Sesame Street, but we were speaking to people who were on the whole representative of the people of Birmingham, a mini demos, and as such people who were fairly much not interested in museums. Most of them said, not really for me, not something I've looked at, not something I'm into. By the end of the process, they were, in a really positive way, extremely militant campaigners on behalf of cultural heritage of Birmingham. And that was really edifying. And just quickly to close, I think the thing that is also a massive challenge is that if there's not enough cake, then a more equitable share of that cake is still not enough cake. And that's a challenge wrapped up in devolution.
Thank you, Sara. And I think that that's really interesting in relation to one of the questions. Amanda was asking whether we had the skills as a sector to engage people at these various levels. And I think what the work that you've done and others on the panel have done shows that we do, but it takes a lot of time and effort and commitment. It's not, you can't just say, well, we've had a meeting or we've had one walk around or whatever. This is something that has to be embedded into everybody's practice. And some people will be more comfortable than that about that than others, I think. Quinton, how does it look from your point of view?
What do I see? The key, I see it as a real opportunity. So I've been doing this job nearly 30 years, and even when I worked in banking, some of my customers are actually archaeological contractors in the brave new world of PPG 16 and developer-funded archaeology. And what I've seen throughout my career is a change in language and a change in appreciation. We've gone from archaeology being a technical consideration within planning, and often an irritant, something to be cleared out of the way before the real stuff can happen. So since then, it's moved through to now we talk about the historic environment in broader terms. We have historic environment records, not sites and monument records. And increasingly, heritage in the historic environment is being seen as a real opportunity. It's a real co-benefit. It's been brought into more and more at local levels. So, I mean, we use historic water features for flood risk management, for example, because, well, why not? That's what they were built for. But to a certain extent, I feel we're being slightly held back by existing structures. I mean, local government, what is it? It has a major change every 50 years. So we've effectively working the legacy of a system introduced in the 1970s. And I'm not sure we're getting the full opportunity and full public benefit of what we have, what the resources we have, because the historic environment is an absolutely fantastic resource. It can be used for so much other than sort of purely academic interpretation. And what I would hope for is that devolution and LGR recognises those and gives us the framework and the structure by which we can thrive. My fear, though, is we get left behind because local government has a lot of threats, a lot of challenges, a lot of issues. And I do fear that the environment sometimes gets overlooked. And so I think it's incumbent on us as a sector to keep making that point as to why the environment and the historic environment is important.
Great. Thank you, Quinton. And Owen, I'm going to ask you to wind up in terms of this first question.
This isn't fair. Going last, it makes me sound so unoriginal because I'm effectively going to repeat pretty much what everyone else has said. But I mean, with regards to opportunity, I mean, we know that people are passionate about their local heritage, as JB, as Anna and others have said. We have research that shows that heritage is an important contributor to the pride local people feel about their local place, and that's picked up in the Pride in Place strategy quite rightly. And the importance that the impact that engaging with heritage has on people and how people feel about their place and how people feel about their own well-being. Just from our own High Street Has programme, we saw over 1 million people attending public events. We saw over 250,000 people attending engagement events, and we have over 10,000 volunteers. There's significant local interest and demand for engaging with local heritage, and therefore devolving decision-making, getting those people involved in decision-making should only be a really good thing for historic environment and heritage. But there's 2 points I'd like to make. Firstly, it's not only, I don't think it's only about that link between heritage and pride, but I think what we saw through the High Street Has programme is that heritage is also a tool through which people can engage and and get involved in making decisions about their local place. That actually that is the gateway into local communities playing a greater role in place shaping. And I think for many that is the holy grail. That is not a community that just likes their place, but that's a community that wants to engage in their place and make their place better. And I think that's an important thing that heritage provides. And I think that's an important message we picked out from the High Street Has programme. But as for the challenge, how do we manage this process of change that comes with devolution? And actually, what do we really mean by local decision making? What is the right place to make the right decisions? National and local government make a huge number of decisions, but actually, what's the right level for each of those? Not all of those will be at the hyper local, to use Jamie's language, level, but how do we make that decision? So I'd argue the challenge is the question isn't whether devolution is in itself a good or a bad thing. The challenge is how do we get this process of devolution right? How do we move from what we have now to evolve the decision making, and we don't lose many of the benefits that we have accrued over the last few years?
Yeah. So we're, not surprisingly, all in favour of local decision making. We know that people care about their heritage when they have an opportunity to be engaged. They want to be engaged, but we also know that it's not always at the top of the list of those who are making decisions locally. And you know, one of the points that's been made in the chat, someone's saying, well, some things need to be decided, as you're saying, not at the hyper-local level, because we need consistency across the piece. So there are some areas where things do need to be within the context, at least, of national decision-making and so on. But what mechanisms do we think might encourage local leadership to see heritage as something that they really do need to embed in their plans? And perhaps also picking up a question that we've had in terms of how we can explain to people or encourage people to see that heritage can really contribute to what they might see as their major economic drivers. You know, what more do we need to do? What more can we do to encourage people to see heritage through that lens? Not as an add-on or a nice to have, but something that's absolutely crucial to their planning and to their economic future. Anybody got any thoughts on that? It is the Holy Grail, and we have been trying to do it for a long time. So, you know, Owen first, and then Sara, please.
I think there are two elements. I think firstly, there's the importance of making the case, i.e. what evidence we have for the contribution the heritage makes. And this is where, and I will probably come back at various points today, to Heritage Counts and the brilliance that is Heritage Counts in collecting a huge amount of evidence and data, and just that covers the sheer breadth of heritage's contribution, not only to in the traditional spheres, but beyond, in terms of society, in terms of community cohesion, in terms of economy, in terms of health and well-being. All these different benefits, all encapsulated in Heritage Counts, and excellent bedtime reading for anyone that wants some. Secondly, and aside to making the evidence, it's who you're making the evidence, who you're making the case to. That traditionally we are tended to be put into this cultural bracket. We have conversations with cultural leaders about cultural stuff, and that greatly underplays our significance. And actually, we need to be having the conversations outside of those silos with those who make decisions around economy, around well-being, around community cohesion. We need to be better at engaging those decision makers outside, perhaps, of our usual conversations.
Thanks, Sara.
Yeah, so I think making the case in terms of economic growth and economic impact, that's all really important, and I'm not going to pretend it's not important. But I also think we need to sort of take a beat when we think about this question, because heritage isn't primarily about economic growth. And you know, this is not always politic to say as a cultural leader who wants money for public, you know, assets, because that is the government, you know, orthodoxy at the moment, that everything is about driving economic growth, and culture must make the case just like everything else in terms of its value of economic impact. But the truth is, it's real sort of contribution to economic growth and impact is its contribution to the social fabric and the health of our social fabric. And that indirectly, of course, has a massive impact on economic growth, much more so than the visitor economy and tourism and GVA and all those more reductive kind of metrics that we tend to use. But I've been looking with real interest at a football club in Birmingham that's had a real resurgence. It was relegated, came back up, and it had huge investment from an American donor. And this was a real source of like the opposite of civic pride, sort of civic shame, this terrible sort of relegation. There's been a documentary on the telly about it. You might have seen it. Anyway, in the football club, kind of in the rebirth of it and the redevelopment of it, one of the things that really struck me was not just the money from the angel investor and the transport infrastructure that the mayor wants to put in as a result of this sports quarter. It was the fans and the massive passion of the fans, the massive loyalty over generations and generations. And politicians care about voters. Football stadiums are filled by people who buy tickets en masse. It's mass participation. And when I think about the future of heritage, the future of Birmingham, museums, it is mass participation. We cannot rely on unrepresentative heritage, unrepresentative forms of heritage that are not speaking to the mass. And so all of that question around economic growth, economic impact, it comes back to what fills football stadiums, what touches people's hearts at a mass level. And that is the argument for me indirectly to economic growth.
Yeah. Thank you, Sara. I think that, yes, that's a really powerful argument for us to make sure that we're not just talking to ourselves, frankly, but we're really engaging everyone. Anna.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just on the point that Owen made. I mean, well, and actually Sara made. It's one of the reasons why it's so great that Jamie's here. Actually, that we're not, that we're not just all in our culture heritage bubble. Because I take your points about growth, Sara, but in a place like Oxford, where on the face of it, it's a heritage-rich city, because of its sort of fantastic ancient institutions, but in reality, most of that heritage is not publicly accessible. Some of it's visible, but it's not publicly accessible. And so it's actually, making a case for perhaps the less starry heritage items, so to speak, is harder, and that's hard anywhere. And I was just thinking about a visit that the Heritage Fund Board made earlier this year to Glasgow, to Govan, and where we visited Fairfield, which is a building that was the headquarters of one of the biggest most important shipping firms in the world in its day, and that building, along with several others in Govan, which by the Oxford standard might be perceived as being of a lower status in heritage terms, or actually regenerated by Govan Workspace very early on, from the 70s. Their interest at the time was not in heritage particularly. I mean, it was in finding a way of breathing new life into a kind of very, very fragmented and dislocated community. And in a way, what's interesting there is that the heritage value has been proven, but it actually was a ground up endeavor which had other drivers. And I suppose that as a model is an interesting one, and one that demonstrates not only the importance of what we have been talking about, which is a local community endeavor, but one that then finds a way of partnering not only with enterprise and so on, but with heritage agencies. So it's kind of evolved as the years have gone on, but it's a nice one to look at.
I think that's a really interesting way of us thinking about how we can be engaged as the sector, if you like, and how we can support initiatives and actions that are actually focused on communities and raised by communities. And I'm very conscious, I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat, and I know that there are some real concerns in some areas that actually reorganisation isn't devolution, it's actually taking some things farther away from local communities. And so I think that that interest for us as the heritage organisations of how we can still keep in close touch with local communities is really important. I mean, Jamie, your programme obviously is very much about local community-led activity, local, hyper-local activity. I'm wondering what sort of tools and support we think we might be able to provide so that the communities themselves can take the lead rather than us coming along and saying, this is what you should do. You know, are there things that we can help with to help a community have its voice, have it make its decisions loud and strong and push things through? Jamie, how's it going to work with the Pride in Place project?
Absolutely. And just to mention a couple of things on that, just to bring back to your earlier question though, Carole, I think I'll come back to Owen's point. We know that heritage is associated with how people feel about where they live, and they feel really positive about it. That in itself is associated with economic growth. Higher social capital leads to higher economic growth. So I don't think you need to have a kind of saying that economic growth is the purpose. I think actually there's really good evidence that we have now around just the conditions and causes of economic growth in terms of social capital, which I think is an argument that is broadly being won, I would suspect. On the Pride in Place programme specifically, I think there's a really great opportunity for a couple of things. The first is, I think when you speak to people in their community, they know what they want to do, but knowing how to do it is quite harder. I was talking to a community just outside of Hull, and they really want to build a new community centre and playground. Like, that's pretty clear. Everyone is back and behind that. In Coventry, actually, a real focus on restoring the kind of historic character of the high street in certain parts of it. And then the kind of challenge is, well, how do I go about doing that? What are the practical tools, advice, expertise that I need? And that's where I think people can really help out. I've posted a link to the locations of the programme. Anna, I should follow up with you because Lee's in Oxford is one of our locations. Annalise Dodds has been really helpful in terms of initial conversations. But I'm really interested in, like, there's the historic heart of the city, but there's also so much history. As Oxford is kind of a brilliant industrial base, its role in the war, for example, which I'm sure is a kind of wider debate. But that's how I think we can help. It's people will be telling us what they want to do. It's how they can go about it, and also sharing those kind of inspiring case studies about what the art of the possible is that you did at the start, Carole. There are lots of places with, sadly, underutilized former places of worship that could be brought back into life with a bit of money, a bit of love, and some of the brilliant advice and expertise that, as you set out, in Norwich and Norfolk. So
yeah, and we sort of mentioned place of worship in passing, but we know that one of the big heritage challenges is going to be how to make use of some absolutely outstanding buildings right across the country, which are no longer solely viable for the purpose for which they were built. And that carries with it actually enormous cost in many cases. Looking after a Grade 1 listed building is not usually a cheap thing to do. So this whole question of how we can provide resource to people so that they can do the things they want to do, I think is really crucial. Quinton, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I mean, I've been keeping an eye on the chat because there's some really good points being made in there about this. But to come back to this question of supporting local, I think there's a key thing to realise here, that something doesn't have to be important for it to be important locally. I mean, the number of times I've seen people get enthused about something that is theirs, it's seen as theirs, far more so than something which, from a purely objective approach, is more important. So people will take that as a local interest. And we've seen that a lot recently in Cambridgeshire with the growth of new towns and development. I mean, so we have, I know for about 3 or 4 years in a row, the community in Cambridgeshire that had the most interest in its past, its heritage, was the one that didn't exist before 1992. It was a new town. Yet they wanted to know what was being there. They wanted that connection to the fact that the last people who lived there were actually Romans. Yet they wanted to know about those people who lived where they now live. And we've seen that with increasingly with other new towns coming through, whether they're on airfields or brownfield or greenfield even. And interestingly, the developers are starting to pick this up and incorporate heritage into early stage master planning. So we just go back to the point I made at the beginning about the changing view of the historic environment and how it benefits. It is being picked up, and we do need to keep developing that and taking those opportunities and demonstrating all the value. I mean, we're increasingly getting traction with public health about access to open spaces. That's what that one in the chat. Again, that's a massively important thing to engage with, because it's all about keeping that local and keeping people enthused and encouraged. And very last point, I'm out of time. I agree entirely about people wanting to know how rather than what. And certainly our experience is local community groups, whether it's nature, heritage, or even flooding, succeed more if they're supported to do it themselves. Rather than people coming in and say, here's a great thing, you can do it. It's actually, no, what do you want to do? And we'll help you learn the skills to do it and support you so you become self-supporting. We ran a project 10 years ago now. We set up 16 local heritage groups. I think 12 of them still run because they're self-sustaining with the support, and then we can step back. And that's what we need to be developing further, I would say.
Thank you, Quinton. That's really interesting. And I'm very conscious that there's masses going on in the chat. Don't panic, people. We will keep track of this and follow it up. And there's some really interesting questions coming through. I'm particularly interested in, I think, Joanna's question about the heritage value of local businesses, the local small business that's been on the high street for as long as anyone can remember, and everybody gets their school uniform there or shops there or whatever. How do we see that as part of the local heritage? How do we help those business owners to be supported and to recognize that they are part of what we regard as heritage? I'm also just seeing a question about 2 national bodies concerned with heritage. Oh, there are lots of national bodies concerned with heritage. We all do slightly different things, and we need to get much better at explaining what it is that we each do. We try very hard not to tread on one another's toes, and I don't think we do very often. But if you're not in the sector, I think that's quite a good example of how hard it is to know who to ask. Where would you go? Where would you start? So I think that's a responsibility for all of us to take as well. Sara.
I just wanted to pick up on one of the points in the chat there, actually, by Hannah around, she's put there, when you have a community with a preponderance of George crosses flying from the lampposts, there are real questions around the narrative and anchor that local heritage can provide. To what extent do we follow and to what extent do we lead? In terms of devolution, we've got elections coming up next May. This is a really important part of this discussion around, devolution and heritage and what the opportunities are, because, this is sort of essentially a business to business conversation here, isn't it? So it's not, we wouldn't necessarily expect everybody in the room and everybody who's attended to be representative demographically of the population of the UK, but we know that certain groups, highly educated people, are much more likely to go to museums. We know lots of things about patterns of, who's engaging with formal heritage and who's not. And I just wanted to sort of offer up this information I came across recently, a piece of research by More in Common that was shared at the Labour Party conference debate about heritage. That was looking very broadly at kind of social behaviours, attitudes and relationships to heritage in light of, shifts around the country. And a couple of the segments that they pulled out was something they described as traditional conservatives and rooted patriots. Rooted patriots making up 20% of the population, traditional conservatives making up 8%. And one of the things they notice, they describe these groups as either patriotic groups that feel overlooked by elites, or the traditional conservatives being more likely to derive pride from, to be members of the National Trust and derive pride of the, I'm giving you these really brief sketches.
Yeah.
But the important bit here is how this maps onto patriotism, sense of what heritage is and whose heritage, and the fact that, for example, reform voters are much more likely to think that their local high streets are neglected. And when you start looking at areas of neglect, feelings of patriotism, identity, heritage, and then think about devolution and what the country could look like on the other side of May, one of the issues are, politically, you could then be operating as a small heritage organisation in a council led by a very different kind of political party than was leading it before, who may or may not value culture or heritage in their priorities. At least at the moment, Labour states that it does value that. We don't see that in much monetary terms around here in Birmingham, but these are a big swirl of questions for us. And although I may not have all the answers to them, I do think there's something to return us to the question of citizen-led decision-making that is a important sort of balance and a different kind of democratic and deliberative democratic process that could offer us some clues in this quite kind of complex terrain.
I'm sure that's right, Sara, and I think many examples from my time at what is now the National Lottery Heritage Fund of taking the time to do the work with communities that started off perhaps thinking they had nothing that was of interest to one another or that was shared, and working through a period of time, realizing that actually it's a truism, but people are people, everyone has a history, everyone has a story, and that that is something that can be shared, and maybe heritage is a place to do that in a safer way than in some other places if it's well managed. I've got Owen and then Quinton to come in, please. Owen.
Thank you, Carole. Just moving back to the point made earlier around the support for those kind of developing community groups, and the pride in place strategy, puts pressure on local government to establish that community level governance that actually establish those community groups that are there to help them support and make these decisions, place-based decisions. And there is a challenge on the heritage sectors. How do we engage with what will be a huge number of groups? What is the right level of support for those groups that aren't, as others have pointed out, that isn't prescriptive, isn't this is how you do this, it is we're here to help. But how do we get that message, and is the heritage sector ready to support quite so many groups? Now, there was a comment in the chat earlier on about the number of different national heritage organisations, and actually that's why there is important in having these different national heritage organisations. And I'd like to name check the Heritage Network, formerly Heritage Trust Network. There are an organisation who are set up to provide that kind of support at that community level, in a way that actually it's going to be hugely important as we move forward to this kind of, keep going back to Jamie's phrase of hyper-local, as we move into a kind of hyper-local future. Those kind of organisations, I think, become more and more important.
Thank you, Owen. Yes, absolutely right. Quinton, I'm going to take your question, and I'm going to pick up one or two questions from the Q&A that's coming through as well.
I just wanted to say that there's a real opportunity to ask questions of the decision makers coming forward next 2 years, because we're going to be re-electing or newly electing an entire new tranche of local government at the same time, or within a couple of years of each other. And one thing I have noticed that the natural environment sector do is they're very good at approaching these elections, writing to key candidates in sort of the mayoral authorities, for example, and saying, what is your manifesto commitment to nature and biodiversity? And then they push that around their members. And I'm just wondering, because we're normally in local government, every year is an election year, there's always something going on. Because all this is being done at the same time, is this the opportunity to start asking these questions directly of people who will be the new elected representatives, particularly at the strategic authority level, with the newly elected mayors?
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and it's something that we can all do as individuals. I'm just looking at something in the chat, Alison. I agree entirely. We're not saying that heritage is safe, but we're saying that we can make safe spaces for people to talk about heritage and have the sorts of conversations that the issues that Sara was raising can be addressed in a way that is manageable and not confrontational. So I think we're clear that we've got a lot of work on our hands. I mean, there are some questions coming through in the Q&A about trust and confidence and what the role of, for example, local media is, the media generally might be, which is very, very different than it was, say, 10 years ago. So how can we support a positive approach? How can we deal with a situation in which all too often the things that are seen as valuable in heritage are also seen as blocking something else that someone else wants to do? I try to avoid using that until we'd got well into the debate, but I think there is a feeling very often that anyone who stands up and says this bit of heritage is really important to me is in some way standing in front of something that would otherwise be a fantastic development or an economic driver or whatever. How do we turn that around so that we really, really keep sharing the idea that this is an opportunity? Here we have a fantastic approach. Quinton mentioned that how if you like, the Green Alliance groups are very good at writing, asking for what's in people's manifestos. I think also the tourism sector is actually really good at this and talking about the importance of tourism, the scale of the contribution of tourism to domestic product. We collect all of the information. We've collected it for a long time. As has been said, there's data everywhere. What do we do with it? Do we make sufficient use of it? Are we clever enough about how we use it? Oh, and sorry, that's a different question. You may not be wanting to talk about that.
It is. You've covered quite the ground there, Carole. Well, I think to answer your final point, we show we don't tell. We show that that actually development that places heritage at its heart is better development. That we're not talking about blocking. We're talking about quality. We show them the likes of Ancoats in Manchester. We show them what's happening in Hastings. We show them Queen's Mill in Castleford. That change that reflects and enhances the character of place is better for everyone concerned. It lasts longer. It brings the community with it. I mean, there is an issue that for many development is associated with, you know, off the bland houses that have no link to the place in which they're built in. There's no connection, and therefore there is no inherent pride connection to the place. And Quinton mentioned earlier on that even now the developers are looking at the heritage of the place in which they're developing and looking to develop at the master planning stage that connection to the history and the heritage of the place. There is value there because it makes places better.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Anna.
Yeah, I mean, this is the huge challenge, isn't it? And as you say, Carole, there are tons of case studies, loads of data, and so going back to my very first point, you know, the challenge is really to achieve cut through at a face-to-face level almost. You know, you absolutely need the frameworks, the policies, the national organisations. But it is incumbent on all of us to be kind of personally taking up the challenge to communicate this. And as I said earlier, working across sectors. Because, you know, somewhere like King's Cross, for example, is a great example of an area utterly transformed for the better, with the heritage right at the heart of it. But that's done. I mean, so we can look at that as a case study and say that's isn't that fantastic? But that it's all about moving forwards the whole time to try and broker those new relationships and opportunities. And as as a preservation trust, with a name that sounds like it's not really up for it. I mean, the opposite has to be true and is true, which is that organisations like mine do need to look forward and do need to be able to convince potential partners and officials and politicians that we can do that. So it is partly about the right policies and the right incentives and all those case studies, but it is also it's kind of missionary work, and that. I'm sure everybody on this panel agrees with that, and everybody has to take responsibility for really pushing the case.
Thanks, Anna. Jamie.
It's a tricky area for me to comment on, but I just wanted to mention just a couple of observations from my sort of going around the country and chatting to people. I think, as Quinton said earlier on, there's a sort of this huge appetite for people to know about the history of where they come from. I was in another new town a few weeks ago, one that was developed in the 1960s, and people were really, really interested about what was there before and how they could find out more about it. And then the other observation I'd make is about 10 years ago, part of my job was to try and help increase housing supply across the country, but in a way which was sustainable. And one of the things I was fascinated by was that 10 years ago, the developers were telling me, well, we can't possibly put solar panels on the roofs of houses because it would make them unviable and we can't afford them. And just a couple of weeks ago, I was in the West Midlands looking at quite good new housing development. And I noticed that all of the houses had solar panels on the roof. And I asked whether that's because the building regs had changed in the time. And the developer said, no, it's no change to the building regs. It's what the public are demanding. And that's my point of difference about why we're able to sell these as fantastic new family homes, because people are worried about their energy bills and they're worried about the environment.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. I think that's a fantastic reinforcement of the fact that actually, I'm not sure I'm going to put this correctly, but that this is not for us to do, as heritage professionals doing stuff. It's a huge responsibility for us to support initiatives and to help support growing demand and understanding from people that they want to live in nice places. And by nice places, that doesn't just mean pretty, it means they want to live in places that have got real links to the past, that work for them. That may be parks and streetscapes, but it may also be knowing that this is the street that world famous footballer was born in, that athlete went to this school, that so-and-so was born in that particular hospital. Those sorts of stories that connect people are so powerful. I'm struggling. I'm going to bring Sara in a minute, honestly, but I'm struggling with the concept of how to avoid talking about we and us in a way that excludes everybody else. Because actually this is a whole population enterprise, one way or the other. Sara, can you help with that?
Well, yeah, I was going to sort of coming back to the point about making the case, and Anna's language was missionary, that this is, another way of framing that would be an activist, that, I've certainly been really buoyed and kind of energized by what I've seen from the jurors who came together. And I know I keep banging on about the citizens, jury, but there's such a different spectrum of people and have such different stories and language about things like museums and heritage than the majority of the museum going public. And what really came back to me was that we have an enormous crane count in Birmingham, huge amounts of development, I think no other city centre is currently as under construction in Europe as the city centre of Birmingham. And when you see all of this money being ploughed into, you know, famously we've got brutalist architecture here, and it's the sort of car city. And for those who know their Birmingham history, or those who don't, it sort of supposedly looks very modern and feels like a place with no history. But of course, nowhere has no history. And almost more so because of this culture in Birmingham, the thirst and the appetite for those local stories in the midst of this crane kind of craze is so profound. But actually, as heritage or even culture people or museum people, we have very little power at the table. So I booked a meeting with the chief planning officer because I thought she needs to hear from this deprived, you know, museum director in the regions that her planning frameworks that are under review now nationally, they need to flex and respond to the needs of heritage, not just in the regions, but in the villages, in the towns. And those planning frameworks are for us to influence as much as Arts Council reviews are, or as much as, you know, kind of devolution heritage strategies. We don't even have a conservation officer in the whole of Birmingham, and have not had for a long time. So it is a nonsense for us to talk about, you know, it is an urgency that the citizens jurors expect it of me. They expect for their, you know, the sort of quality of life in Birmingham and their children's future, for me to trot off and find people like the Chief Planning Officer of England to demand on their behalf these things. I don't know if it will work, but it's our jobs, whether you call it activism or missionary zeal.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to suggest that at this point we pause our debate. Panel members will know that we'll have spotted that we've just ranged across the various areas we thought we might cover, and that's absolutely right. And there are so many good questions coming in. But this is a moment when I would like to take us back, if I can, to some questions for our audience. Still well over 400 people here, which is fantastic. And with apologies for those people who've been struggling with the Mentimeter, but don't worry, you can make comments in the chat or the Q&A if you feel you need to. To what extent do you agree that communities have the tools they need to make informed heritage decisions? This is something that I think is going to prove really important, and you may want to comment on the format of the question, in the sense that you know, who decides what's an informed heritage decision? Maybe we're talking about the tools to make heritage decisions. See how you feel about that. Vote on it now, please, and let's see what the general feeling is. I've got two other questions that I'm going to come to you with in a moment. And please do keep putting in your Q&As. And again, as I said earlier, if you like somebody else's question, click the little thumbs up sign and it will rise up the list a little in terms of visibility. Okay, so first question was, to what extent do you agree that communities have the tools they need to make informed heritage decisions? Next one. In my local area, heritage is seen more as an opportunity for growth than a blocker. What do we think about that one? Again, please. No one can see what you're voting. This is just between you and the Mentimeter. Okay. And then our third question is, devolution risks creating a postcode lottery for heritage protection? Whoa, I can see already that there's a fairly strong feeling that that's likely to be the case. Keep going with your voting, keep going with your Q&A, but I'm now going to ask Laura Carter, one of our great supporters from Ecclesiastical Insurance, our corporate partner, to update us on some research that they've been doing on considerations for new custodians of heritage assets. Ecclesiastical, a word I find difficult to say, do great research and are very generous in sharing it with us at a very good stage. We haven't really gone into community ownership in much detail yet. I mean, we may want to in the questions, but there will be powers for community ownership. And I can see from some of the chat that questions about who is there to support new potential community owners have been coming in. So please do also ask questions to Laura in the Q&A as you go. But Laura, could I ask you to just tell us a bit about the research that you've been doing and to talk us through some of the things that have come up for you?
Yeah, absolutely, Carole, and thank you for the time today. I feel like I'm interrupting a great debate, so I will keep to time. So good afternoon, everyone. My name's Laura Carter. I'm the Customer Segment Director for Ecclesiastical Insurance. I've worked here for 8 years and more broadly within the insurance sector for over 20 years. My pronouns are she, her. I am a white woman in my 40s, and I'm joining you today working from home in Hampshire. I have shoulder-length brown hair and I'm wearing a black top and cardigan, and I'm delighted to be able to speak to you today as Heritage Alliance's corporate sponsor. So just moving through to my slides, just moving on to the first slide. There's 3 areas that I want to cover off today. So 2 pieces of research. The first being ways that for empowerment for communities. So I want to highlight some research carried out by the Directory of Social Change for our partner company, or parent company even, the Benefact Group, in the charity support programme we provide and the benefits that have been felt to help support resilience and empower communities decide on what matters most. The second area I want to touch on is considerations for local leaders to know about. So some further separate research that we've carried out earlier this year, which touches on pressures facing heritage visitor attractions and organisations. The research asked about 750 leaders about the risks they face in the next 12 months and the next 3 years. And if you see as you'll be able to see that the findings were remarkably similar. And finally, if you are a local community that has the opportunity and is preparing to take on a new venture for the first time, or an existing organisation who's wanting to add to their portfolio, just some kind of very high level points with regards to areas not to forget from an insurance needs perspective, and also how these can be supported from a risk management perspective as well. So just moving on, the first piece of research that I want to touch on is with regards to the research that was conducted by the Directory of Social Change for us on this next slide, which was conducted for our parent company, the Benefact Group, earlier in the year via a survey which they carried out with 320 charities, and an online interview was carried out with a further 10. All of the charities had engaged with us in some form of way with the Benefact Group and had taken advantage of the support tools we had available. So just looking at the information that we've got on this slide here, so what it actually means, and what do I mean when I talk about support tools? Throughout our charity support programme, we've been delivering wraparound support to charities of all kinds, providing free, practical resource and interventions, which from our research show a transformative impact, which builds skills, boosts confidence, and also strengthens communities. So really what I want to touch on is kind of the information that you see on this slide here. And as you can see, the additional support equated to a fantastic multiplier. Every £1 spent, £37.50 of economic benefits are generated for charities. And from the stat that you can see on the left-hand side, there is a recognition from charities that they do need support from corporates that goes further than funding. Whilst funding is essential, the most enduring and impactful impact that does come through was helping to teach charities how to find donors. That means pairing financial support with practical tools, expert guidance and capacity building, and helping charities to thrive, not just survive. Other statistics that came from the research include 88% of charities saying they received training from us that they otherwise would not have been able to afford. 87% of charities saw improvement in their ability to write funding applications using their tools and training. And 41% of charities expanded their professional networks with our networking events. So the point I'm really trying to get across here is that actually engaging with local corporate organisations within your communities will help you to benefit from skills that they may be prepared to offer, as well as the funding, which will have a far bigger impact than the funding alone. So on the next slide, I just want to talk about another initiative that we've also been looking at this year that really shows the power of community in something that we've trialled for the first time. Our Pay It Forward initiative is another perfect example of devolved decision making, where charities are really choosing who should receive that funding next. The initiative gave 5 charities £2,000, and then in turn, these charities were able to choose the next charity who could receive that £2,000. As you can see from the map, the giving for the 5 communities stayed in geographically close areas and also stayed within the same type of causes. You can't see it in the text at the bottom on the right, but examples here were keeping the money within the homelessness, within childhood cancer, and within animal charities. So our Pay It Forward pilot demonstrated that trust-based, peer-led giving can break down barriers and reach charities often excluded from traditional funding streams. The initiative's success really suggests strong potential for this model to be adopted more widely, encouraging funders to explore collaborative, community-driven approaches to philanthropy. We found that when charities themselves chose who should receive funding next, they didn't just pick wisely, they picked each other. And that local decision-making was really in action around trust, collaboration, and shared purpose. And I'm really pleased to say that this initiative will be continuing through into 2026. Moving on to the next slide, I just wanted to touch on some of the practical tools that I mentioned previously. So this is really around the wraparound support that we provide that goes beyond donations alone. There will be a link that will appear in the chat at some point, and here you'll be able to find practical support for a whole host of areas, including expert-led webinars, articles, guidance, templates, reports, and podcasts. Our support focuses on areas that smaller charities often find challenging, such as fundraising, social media, the impact of AI, recruitment and retention, and health and well-being of their teams. So what we've developed has been actually developed in conjunction with experts from across the charity sector, based on topics requested by the charity sector. So I really do hope that you find them of use. On the next slide, I want to touch on the next piece of research that I talked about at the start. So this was some research that was conducted for Ecclesiastical by One Poll earlier this year. We asked heritage, visitor attractions and organisations a number of questions regarding the risks they face both in the next 12 months and the next 3 years. 2 areas I want to touch on from the findings relate to theft and damage, and also diversification. Sadly, 1/3 of the respondents have had either fine art damaged or stolen, and 36% have lost other valuable items. The research showed that this trend is staying and continuing to get slowly worse over time. This type of trend also reflects previous research that we've conducted, which has shown the rise in heritage crime, including arson, since the pandemic. So sadly, these trends are continuing. And not all of these thefts are when venues are closed, such as the Blenheim Palace example that is on the screen. There are instances of thefts occurring when a venue is also open, and obviously the most high profile of one of those being the theft from the Louvre in Paris in the last month. Therefore, taking on a new venture really, I suppose I would say, consider, are there any irreplaceable objects that are coming with that venture that you're taking on? And really to consider how to protect those from both a risk management as well as insurance perspective, which I'll touch on shortly. A separate statistic, which I also found interesting, was the rise in organisations looking to diversify either now or over the next number of years. As it shows, 32% have already diversified, and a further 49% are looking to do the same in the future. The need for staying relevant, particularly if the venue is wanting to attract the local as well as wider communities, is really important, and being part of that community is a way to able to reflect that by looking at that as a unique position to be capitalised on. So moving on to the next slide, I just wanted to touch on insurance and risk management. So whether you're looking to set up an organisation to take on a new venture or an existing organisation who's adding to their portfolio, the need to make sure you have the correct insurance in place is vital. Depending on the nature of what the organisation is doing, there are some broader areas to consider to help protect your property and your assets, your visitors, your people, and your own organisation. If you have a property, it's important to protect from both a property damage perspective to ensure the building is covered in the event of damage or loss, and also to consider the business interruption this brings. So considering how to protect the revenue or income you would normally receive whilst the building is impacted. Other aspects to consider would be insurance for art and collections or contents more broadly, particularly in relation to the statistics I discussed on the previous slide. And another important area to consider is protecting beneficiaries and supporters. So ultimately, the public that might come and visit any venture that you've got, making sure that they're covered from a public liability perspective to cover claims that may be made by a member of the public due to injury or third-party property damage. The next area is looking at protecting your trustees, employees and volunteers. Employees' liability is a compulsory class of insurance and is concerned with your legal liability in case of injury suffered by employees or volunteers in the course of their employment, including legal and compensation expenses. Another area is personal accident cover, which provides cover for employees whilst on premises or engaged in fundraising activities. And another area is having comprehensive trustees and management liability cover. It's also very important to protect the key decision makers who can personally be liable for the decisions they make. And finally, also having comprehensive legal expenses covered to cover areas such as redundancy and unfair dismissal. Other examples being contract disputes, debt recovery, or tax protection as examples. So hopefully these have just shown you some of the types of insurance that could be available to cover a vast array of areas, not just the property. So depending on the services the organisation may be running, you'll be able to select insurance covers that would be the most appropriate for that provision of protection. And finally, just moving on to my last slide, I just wanted to touch on risk management and some practical tools that can sit alongside insurance and ultimately provide that programme of regular repair and maintenance. In the long run, a regular programme of maintenance for historic buildings is ultimately less costly in the longer term. It's therefore really important just to make sure that these are being considered and looked at so that urgent repairs aren't necessarily necessary and costly in the future. Our ecclesiastical website provides helpful risk management guidance on different types of risk, including those such as fire safety, security, environmental and weather impacts, and also health and safety. We also have a risk advice line that allows you to have a conversation with one of our risk surveyors who can provide you with a whole array of guidance as well. And we also provide support from a strategic or enterprise risk management perspective, so providing steps to help your organisation run smoothly with support for areas such as developing a risk register, disaster recovery, business continuity planning. You can also find a free user-friendly assessment tool as well that will help organisations strengthen their risk maturity arrangements. So by improving their risk maturity rating, an organisation should be in a better position to fulfil their strategic objectives, effectively managing risks and maximising new opportunities and improving resilience, ultimately assuring a good degree of preparedness for events which may occur. So just to conclude, hopefully these have provided some great ways that communities can look at taking on a new venture, aspects to consider, and that need for protection and maintenance. So that's it for me. I'd just like to say thank you for listening, and I hope you found some of the research findings and the area of support informative. And I will hand back to Carole.
Laura, thank you. We've put the links to the ecclesiastical material in the chat. There is a fantastic suite of materials there, particularly for small organisations looking to start out and to think about how to go about things. So enormous thanks to Laura and Ecclesiastical for providing that. I am incredibly conscious that there's masses in the chat, really, really helpful. People are putting in so many good links to projects they've been involved with and so on. And don't worry, we will not lose all of that. We're going to have to be really creative about how to bundle it up in an accessible fashion. But I now want to get into picking up some of the questions that have come through, and some of the things that we've known have been issues for a long while, but we still haven't really cracked. So I want to bundle up some skills questions here. You know, there are questions about how we make sure that we support and maintain traditional skills that are needed for the built environment in particular. How do we encourage people to go into areas that are currently struggling to find new recruits? And alongside that, and possibly providing part of the answer, how do we come up with a more inclusive workforce? We talk a lot about the wish to cover the entire population, to be as inclusive as possible, but I think it's probably fair to say that when people look at those of us who are working in and around heritage at the moment, they don't necessarily see a community in a workforce that reflects the community that they live in. And I remember having a conversation with Esme Ward about this, about saying how she wanted her museum to, the people in her museum to look like the people on the streets outside. I think we've got quite a long way to go to achieve that. So looking at any of you who would like to start this panel, how do we go about supporting those heritage skills that we know we need, and also coming up with a more inclusive workforce, and that inclusion in all aspects? Anna.
I'm really glad this question's come up, the skills question, because it's so important. And if we can get it right, we'll solve so many problems, I think. And I do feel that, I mean, you know, I've been talking really from the perspective of OPT, but here's a kind of a shout out for the Heritage Fund. You know, there is a strong case for a national distributor with a dedicated funding stream, you know, which isn't going to be diverted into other things, because that's what it's there for. And I think, I mean, Heritage Fund has done a lot of good work in this area, but probably that, you know, probably could do more in terms of, you know, offering incentives and support and funding for skills, heritage skills. And I hope very much we will see more of that. I think the second question, the related question, which is about, you know, inclusivity, is in the context of skills is again, one with great potential. You know, that actually there's a risk when we talk about heritage assets that we do perceive of them as primarily visitor attractions. I don't think anybody on this panel has done that, but you know, there is a view that perceives of public engagement in a quite a narrow way, whereas actually if the public engagement is to do with supporting you know, a diverse range of people in skills, then you know, that I think that's in a way this, you know, one of the most important things we could do to therefore drive, you know, proper engagement with this material in a sustainable way. So I think there's a huge opportunity, and I think the national funders have a really big role to play.
Thanks, Anna. And you know, a comment in the questions. Yes, of course, there are skills gaps right across the sector, and that includes the green skills gap very much. And you know, it is an area where I think particularly we have an opportunity potentially to really demonstrate to young people in particular what opportunities there are. One of the other questions earlier on was about going into schools and talking within an educational context about the opportunities within the sector. And I don't know whether that's something that any of our panelists have been involved in, have found useful. I have to say, I don't think that it's very common to find that schools have people coming in from our sorts of sectors to say, look, this is a great job, this is a fantastic opportunity. How often might that crop up on a school's agenda? And would it be great if we could encourage people to talk about the fantastic pleasure and feedback and career opportunities they've had through working in sector right across heritage. Sara?
I went to Joseph Chamberlain Sixth Form College not that long ago to talk to the students there, and I thought they would think I was the coolest thing when I said I'm the first Asian museum director in the UK, mainly Asian young people. They thought I was the uncoolest thing they had ever seen. It was like they threw so much shade on me. It was one of the most humbling experiences of my professional life, staring at like 400 incredibly bored, unimpressed teenagers. But the positive bit is they don't all suddenly sign up to be directors of Birmingham Museums Trust. But the positive bit of this story is that we do have the most ethnically and class-wise diverse workforce in the museum sector in the UK. As far as I know, 50% of the senior team are not white, like Birmingham. More than 50% of the senior team here are working class backgrounds. And so definitely can be done in terms of, you know, making heritage workforces representative. It's and my very short thing on that is I've done it. Other leaders just need to get on and do it. Don't know why they don't. Sorry. So in terms of conservation and heritage skills, the thing that I'm starting to see is, as I mentioned a few times, Birmingham's really young population, and we have a big project of kind of community-led digitization heritage skills, and we are just seeing a massive uptake in that, massive interest around. And it's not just because it's wrapped up in digitization, but it's just that a lot of my workforce, a lot of my visitors, a lot of people in Birmingham are digital natives in a way that I'm not. This is my mobile phone, always gets a laugh. So I think in terms of heritage skills and conservation skills, on the one hand, we don't have a conservation officer in Birmingham, and archaeology skills are really important. We are really fortunate to have an incredible finds liaisons team here and in the West Midlands. And those skills are, you know, really valuable and quite expensive to develop. And there is no real shortcut around that. But I do think that there's something around how we frame what conservation skills are, what they look like, whose they are, and sort of broaden that definition while still looking after those quite expensive skills, but broadening them out and thinking about how to modernize them and how to engage a new generation in them. And the money has to be there. You know, there's no way around it. I'm sorry, it always sort of seems to come back to that, but money for jobs has to be there.
Yeah, thank you, Sara. And I think one of the comments in the chat as well, that we can be as enthusiastic as we like about working in the sector, but actually people have to be paid. It has to be a wage that they believe they can live on, that they can look after themselves and their families on. And that's, I think we've got quite a long way to go on that, certainly at entry level. Quinton, sorry, you've been waiting for a while.
No, it's fine. I was going to say, I do go to careers fair. What was my son's school go every year to talk about careers more generally in archaeology, but also I do get questions about museums and other heritage opportunities. And there seems to be an air of astonishment that you can actually have a successful, structured career in this sector. I'm particularly in archaeology, and there are 6,000-7,000 professional archaeologists in this country. And you can do it. But the reluctance I'm finding is actually from the parents who don't think it is a valid career. And I just wanted to quickly say, in Cambridgeshire, with the Combined Authority, have just set something up for schools' engagement in heritage. And because of one aspect of where the money for that's come from, it has to have a skills and careers thing. So as part of that engagement, it will be come to visit our site, our location, and we'll tell you about it, but we'll also tell you about the people who work here and how you can see it as an opportunity. And we're starting next year, and hopefully we'll try and break down this perception that this sector isn't about having a career.
Yeah, thank you, Quinton. Owen and then Laura.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to make the point that we can't. I don't think we should just look at inclusion in the workforce in isolation. And I think there's also a need to consider how inclusive heritage is more broadly. And then actually, if heritage is more broadly isn't inclusive, then actually it is only a natural result that the workforce therefore isn't more inclusive. And I think we are getting better at engaging with those communities who don't see their experiences reflected in heritage. But as we devolve decision making, these kind of issues become more vital, and we do need to make sure that we don't end up in a place where we're only listening to the voices that are loudest, and that we are being proactive to engage with those that don't see themselves in effectively what we do.
Yeah, thank you. That's really important. Laura.
Mine's just an example from the insurance market. I mean, we've done some visits into local schools and things like that. I think just to break the perception of what insurance is and the different vast array of roles that are in there, and this then I suppose the educational skills that can be applied. So actuaries, you know, a really mathematical background, people in marketing, so more from that kind of English literature, kind of those sorts of skills as well. And also it's kind of helped break probably the perception of the types of people that go into insurance as well. So in terms of diversity and all those sorts of areas too. And it's interesting, there's a lady who's within my team, she joined us on a graduate program, was telling her younger sister about it, who then has applied for an apprenticeship. So I think actually it's that kind of word of mouth, actually once it gets out, then it really does benefit. It's just, I think there's probably to Quinton's point, it's some of those perceptions that it's breaking the barriers of some of those perceptions, but mine is purely from an insurance perspective, just kind of seeing a few similarities, I suppose, from that perspective of what the outside perception is versus what it's like inside.
Thank you, Laura. Anna.
Just quickly, I mean, Sara, first of all, I love that story about your experience in a school. It's a bit like my experience of a never to be repeated experience when I was at English Heritage of having to do a TikTok live and seeing all the comments, which were, who is this old granny? So I never did that again. I just wanted to pick up the point actually that you dropped in, Carole, about the green agenda. And actually we haven't really talked about this in connection to the historic building stock. And you know, it can be thought of that you know, adapting for climate change is actually really hard, and it is hard, and so on. But increasingly, of course, you know, the embodied carbon in our historic buildings is actually something that we should be seeking to preserve. And so I think in the context of the question about skills and about attracting young people to work in heritage, there's a way of framing heritage in the context of climate change, which should be, you know, we should be doing anyway, but potentially perhaps has more appeal to young people who are concerned about that, you know, and perhaps less concerned about old fogies like me.
Thank you. Yes, it comes to us all, Anna. I'm never going anywhere near TikTok. I can't even manage all of my social media accounts. It's far too much. Okay, we have got at least 3 hours worth of additional questions that we could tackle. And we're getting to the point where we're going to start running out of questions, not least because I can see 1 or 2 people saying they need to start leaving us. I am so excited by the material that's in the chat and some of the questions that have come up. There is masses of content that people have been sharing with us, and we will save this. We will find ways of making it available to people, so fear not. We could clearly talk about this for several more debates and still not get to the bottom of it. But I hope that what we've been able to do today is at least surface some of the questions that are in people's minds in particular. I'm very conscious that Laura's provided some great materials for people who are starting out on the journey of looking after a piece of heritage or saving a piece of heritage, rescuing a piece of heritage. There has been a sort of strand of questioning all through from people about how do they do that? How do they tackle that? And as has been said in the chat on a number of occasions, there are organisations out there to help. But I think we'll need to think very carefully about how we respond to those questions. But I would like to just ask our panelists to go round, and I'm going to go in a different direction this time. I'm going to ask Jamie first and then Sara, just to give you all some clues. Just to summarise in a few sentences, whether you think local decision making is a good future for heritage. I was going to ask whether it is the future for heritage. At the moment, we can't tell, I don't think, because we don't know what all of the detailed approaches are. But do we think that this is going to be a real opportunity for heritage? And how do we grab that opportunity? Oh, my screen's just changed, so it's no longer. Jamie, I'm going to come to you first anyway. You know, what is it that we think about local decision making and heritage? Jamie, I'm going to start with you.
I think local decision making is incredibly important, and I think it's where the strongest opportunity lies. And just to say a massive thanks for a really interesting conversation and debate, and particularly everyone who's contributed through the chat. It's been really, really inspiring. I think it's how you have that decision and where that takes place is really important. And I was particularly struck by Sara's experience of the citizens' jury in Birmingham and how you change the nature of the dialogue, both for people who don't necessarily think that heritage is something for them when actually it's something for everyone, but also unlock people's passion and excitement as well in a way which is inclusive and thoughtful. But that is about engaging with people in a different way, kind of where they are and how they want to be spoken to. And yeah, let's all aim for kind of mass football match style attendance. That sounds great.
Thank you, Jamie. And can I just check with you that your Pride in a Place programme will provide links between the different places that are engaged?
Yep, absolutely. And if anyone wants to get in touch with me to find out more, please do just drop me a line. I should be able to find me on LinkedIn or various places.
You may regret that, but I
No,
think that's a really interesting way of creating another network of people who are at the same sort of place, the same development stage, who can maybe support one another in terms of thinking about how local decision making really works. Sara.
Yeah, I mean, unsurprisingly, I'm not going to say that local decision making is a great thing. It's an absolutely great thing, but I also have the words of Laura Pye, the director of Liverpool Museums, ringing in my ears on a stage at a conference earlier this week. She reminded folks that Liverpool is roughly similar sort of population as Bristol. Bristol gets 3 million for their museums. Liverpool gets 30 million. Those sort of inconsistencies all around the country are wild, and local decision making is part of democracy, and democracy is also about making better decisions strategically and nationally. The English Civic Museums Network group of we sort of represent a sector which is about 500 museums all over England. We are really lobbying hard at the moment for strategic policy that is long-term and addresses some of the real structural inequalities and nonsenses of the way that heritage is funded in this country. And without really sensible, serious conversation with serious policymakers who are doing this work for the long term, local decision making would risk being a sort of pretty bauble on an otherwise, going to mix my metaphors here, but I think you know what I'm saying, democracy washing. We have to be really careful of that. And the other side of it is I have all the faith and all the sort of enthusiasm for citizen-led decision making. Implementing it is, that's the rubber hits the road when you're implementing it. The jurors have given us a lot of recommendations, and they are really important. Implementing it is going to be my life's work.
Yeah, I think that's so important, because probably all of us can run a consultation exercise without too much trouble. Whether we actually do anything with the results is what leads people to believe that we are really listening or not. And if the answers aren't the answers we want, what are we going to do about it then? Quinton.
It's local decision making a future heritage, well, yes, but local decision making is also a past of heritage. There's always been local decision making in heritage. The difference, I think, and this is where I think it is, the outcomes and consequences of those decisions have changed. They've broadened, they've become more important, and effectively the decisions are bigger than they were. And what I think we need to harness is to make sure that the people that those decisions are fully understood. I mean, I'm sure everybody in this panel and everybody in the room, the virtual room, had examples of bad local decision making, whether you're trying to unravel bad conservation from the 60s, or, you know, insufficient excavations in the 30s and 40s, damage to scheduled monuments in the 1980s. All those were local, but now we're fully aware of them. And what I think is needed is an appreciation of the framework in which those decisions are made, and to make sure that people making them have the skills to do so. And then we encourage that local decision making to develop and become more impactful.
Yep. Thank you, Quinton. Owen.
I'm slightly worried I'm going to say exactly what Quinton has just said, but less articulately, but I'll try. The local voice has always been important in decision making, and developing it does represent a real opportunity. I mean, if you look at the case studies on Historic England's website, that actually the people responsible for those case studies are not government departments. They tend also not to be Historic England, or I should whisper that. They are local people, they are local partners that have made those happen. Other agents have supported that, but actually driving those forward, the providing momentum has happened locally. And so increasing that level of local decision making, providing more freedom locally, potentially a really, really good thing. But, and I'm afraid there always has to be a but in this, as a heritage sector, we need to get better at hearing all of those local voices. And there is a risk here that we end up just hearing the loudest, which would be terrible. Often in discussions like this and other discussions, we assume the words local and communities are relatively simple terms, and they're used in a kind of singular fashion. They are not simple terms. There is no single local, there is no single community. It takes work, it takes resource, it takes effort to understand what those voices are and to reflect those. So yes, there's real opportunities there, but it's going to take work and effort to get it right.
Thank you. I think that point about no single local, no single community is really, really important. Anna.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I would concur really with what everybody said. I suppose not to repeat, therefore, I think there is something that we haven't really discussed yet, which is about the fact that, you know, many heritage assets sit within a local context, but perhaps also a national context, a regional context, and sometimes an international context. And so there is a way in which decision-making somehow needs to take account of that. And there are ways in which national agencies should support issues such as skills, we talked about that before, that transcend, you know, that are common across the nation. So for me, the proper equipping of local voices and local skills to make decisions is very important, as is a really meaningful partnership with those agencies that can support and enable.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for bringing up a point that's come up in the questions on a number of occasions, that link between the local, the national and the international in terms of importance, and who makes the decisions at which level, and how those can be integrated in a way so that local communities don't feel that things are being imposed on them that they don't understand and that they can't get to grips with. Right, you've all given your views. It's now time for our audience to give their views. I'm going to ask those of you who can use it, please, to go to Menti again and give your answer to the question. Is it yes, no? Is it too soon to tell? I'm going to just waffle a bit for a moment while we see people voting. Not surprisingly, there's a lot of maybes coming up because there's so much that we don't know yet about the detail. And I hope I haven't influenced people from that point of view, but it looks as if maybes still very much in the lead there. Interestingly, some thinking that we need stronger national frameworks. I think too early to say is very close to maybe, really. But not surprisingly, we think it may be, but that we need proper safeguards. And that probably is the rub, isn't it? How is this going to work in detail? Where are we going to see it end up? It would have been remarkable if we'd come to an absolute conclusion as to what the answer was at a time when we don't quite know what the question is yet, because some of the legislative issues are still going through. But I think what's been so powerful about this debate is, first of all, the engagement. You know, we've had well over 400 people engaged in this, masses of contributions through the questions and through the chat function, which we will work on and share with people. The recording will be available by mid-December, and we'll use social channels to reflect. And I hope we can share quite a lot of the links that have been put in by people as well. It's a theme that the Heritage Alliance is going to continue, you won't be surprised to know, to explore with our members throughout the next year as devolution continues to unfold. And we'll be publishing a devolution toolkit for heritage organisations to use to communicate needs and priorities of the sector to local authorities. So that's picking up on one of the points that came up in the questions about our ability to influence by addressing political authorities and local authority staff directly. We'll share it with members in the first instance, but are keen to share it more widely in coming weeks. Next year, as part of a National Lottery Heritage Fund grant, which we've been delighted to be able to announce recently, we're going to be delivering some regional events for the first time, building connections further with academic bodies and strengthening our networks across the country, learning from local heritage sites. And this is picking up on one of the comments that was made in the chat about the number of organisations there are and what they do and how they work at different levels. If you haven't already signed up for our free, emphasis free, heritage update newsletter, goes out fortnightly to over 16,000 people in the sector, and it's a great way of staying connected if you're not able to join the membership. The very best way to engage, and I'm sorry, but I have to say this, is to become a member. Please do think about it. Please do consider whether your organisation would benefit from being part of our membership. We bring together over 200 organisations that cover the breadth of the heritage sector, and we know that we're stronger with one voice. We have an ability to meet with and to advocate to government that is built very largely on the strength of membership, the numbers of organisations, the numbers of people who belong to the organisations that we work with. There'll be more details on membership after the event, so please do think about it. And if you need to talk to us about what it means and whether you can afford it or not, please do talk to us and we'll share that with you. We really hope you enjoyed the debate. I'm really astonished by the level of engagement. You know, people have been so active and engaged that this has been fantastic. We are a charity. This is part of our mission, what we do. If you'd enjoyed the debate and you would like to make a donation, you feel able to make a donation, that also would be much appreciated. But then the last thing I wanted to focus on, because people are what it's all about, is to remind you that nominations are currently open for Ecclesiastical's Heritage Heroes Award, which recognises outstanding contributions in heritage volunteering. There's lots more information about how to nominate people. This is open to members of our members. So if you're a member of the Heritage Network, AIM, part of the Church of England, you can nominate your volunteers for these awards. And winners are announced at our Heritage Day in person in March. Anyone who was at the Tower of London this year will have seen the impact and the emotion that goes with winning one of these awards. So please do think about nominating colleagues and volunteers. And finally, thank you to our sponsors. We really couldn't have done this without their support. But most particularly, we couldn't have done it without our panelists. Sara, Quinton, Jamie, Anna, and Owen, and our speaker, Laura. Really, it makes a huge difference to us to be able to bring together people who've got this depth of experience and honest conversation, and to be able to really engage with you all. We'd like to thank our media partners who contributed to the content of the event. And thank you. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for engaging. And please do look out for the materials that will come out after the event. Jamie's got her hand up. This is very surprising.
By accident.
Okay. And gosh, and thank you for being engaged. We hope we'll see you at our next Heritage Debate next year. And in the meantime, good luck. Keep sharing what you do. Keep believing in what you do. We know it makes a difference, and we know that people value it. So thank you for your engagement, and see you next year. Thank you.